All right, I think we can get kicked off here. So, welcome everyone to another exclusive Apollo webinar. Thanks so much for joining Nathan and I as we dive into the complexities and challenges that may present themselves on your way to achieving product market fit for your startup. As I said, today I'm joined by Nathan Hudson. Nathan is a seasoned entrepreneur and growth strategist with a passion for overcoming hurdles of growing a profitable tech startup, right? With extensive past experience as the head of growth for both Spoke and Amble, Nathan's navigated, the challenges of finding product market fit, solving, retention issues, scaling acquisition profitability, and improving unit economics for a number of startups. Recently, as of December 2022, he founded Perceptics, which is a growth agency dedicated to helping the early stage startups scale their business from seed to Series B, embodying, his commitment for driving growth, retention, revenue through, some pretty brutal prioritization, I'm sure, constant, experimentation and, effective team alignment. So welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Jamie. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here. Really looking forward to today's session. Yeah, hopefully you all get some good value.
I'm sure they will. So yeah, guys, as it kind of says in the description, we're kind of going to be diving into a number of different topics around product market fit. So, diagnosing and achieving product market fit, frameworks and metrics for measuring it, and how to achieve growth. And then obviously diving into kind of team dynamics and also looking into hiring for growth as well. As we work through the conversation, guys, feel free to drop your own questions as well into the chat. And we'll leave some time towards the end of the session to address those as well. So yeah, Nathan, I thought we'd start off on a pretty basic note. What is product market fit, mate?
Maybe a not so basic one to start with, right?
Yeah.
So I think to kind of answer what product market fit is, or how I think of product market fit, it's probably easier to think about what product market fit is not, right? Like a lot of people think that product market fit is getting your first customers, or once you've got a certain number of users, then you've got product market fit. And it's kind of this very elusive thing. Different people define it in different ways. My favorite definition actually comes from Mark Andreessen, which I was watching a Y Combinator video like 4 or 5 years ago, and they kind of dropped this quote in there, and it basically says the customers are buying the product just as fast as you can make it, or usage is growing just as fast as you can add more servers. Money from customers is piling up into your company account. You're hiring sales and customer support staff as fast as you can. Now, that definition doesn't really suggest early stage, right? It kind of suggests that you're more established, or even you're a scale up. And I would say that one of the biggest misconceptions is that product market fit is something that startups just achieve. I actually think that it's more common in scale ups, and that once you've achieved product market fit, you're very close to being a scale up. And that's kind of how I like to think of it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And as you said, it's not such a simple question because it means different things, and it can mean different things along your own kind of startup lifestyle, right? I think you had touched on before, the difference between like the problem market fit and the product market fit. And yeah. I guess that those can be easily confused.
Well, yeah, I think there's loads of different fits, right? The first one that I think startups should start with is language market fit or problem market fit. So problem market fit is you found a group of people that all seem to have this certain problem, and you've decided that you're going to solve that problem, right? That's problem market fit. Language market fit is when you figure out how to communicate your idea to that market, not in a way that they necessarily purchase from you, but in a way that they understand what you have to offer. I think now product market fit is something different entirely. And I like to highlight the word market in there. One of kind of the hills I stand on and will die on is that product market fit requires revenue, right? And I think a lot of times startups, specifically like subscription products or tech products, think, hey, we can get product market fit first, and then we'll monetize the startup, and then we'll scale. And I would argue that, look, if you're not making revenue, then you don't have product market fit, because the definition of a market is an arena where commerce takes place, right? It's like, if you're not selling something and having people purchase something, then it's actually impossible to get product market fit. So my kind of encouragement to everyone is to be prepared for a longer journey than you thought. And yes, chase product market fit, but don't think, oh yeah, we're going to get product market fit this year. I've seen so many pitch decks and spoken with so many founders, and they're like, yeah, so this year we're focused on product market fit, and then next year we're going to scale, and then the year after that we're going to exit. And it's like, well, probably all 3 of those years are going to be product market fit, and in that you will scale a bit, and in that some employees will exit, but you might still be there. And I think, yeah, really focusing on unit economics and figuring out, are we actually building a business here is really key to product market fit.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And yeah, I liked what you said there, because it's definitely something I've noticed while working with Hyper. A lot of founders believe they found that product market fit just by like overfitting the solution based on their own experience. Yeah. Right. So what kind of, like, beyond the definition that you provided there, how can you diagnose that a startup is not experienced product market fit? Are there any specific like red flags or specific signs that you've kind of identified in your experience?
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 main data points or touch points that I like to look at to judge whether or not a company has product market fit. We could say there's 3. The first one is the disappointed survey. So I think it was the Superhuman founder who came up with this, but essentially it's just that you survey your user base, right? And you ask them the question, how disappointed would you be if you could no longer use insert product name? Then there's a series of questions you can ask on the back of that to kind of understand more. But that question is essentially a guide. And what you're looking for is for 40% of people to say very disappointed. Right, so the answers are very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or not disappointed. Now, I've worked with startups specifically that had younger audiences where we changed the language of that question so it wasn't so formal. It can also sometimes be difficult to read, and people are like, how disappointed would I be? Like, there's other ways you can word it, but the kind of idea behind this is we're looking for qualitative feedback in some sense that suggests that they would be upset if we weren't here. The other one, which I think is the more data-led approach, is just by looking at retention. So a retention curve should flatten. So a lot of times for startups, you get a group of users and then they just die out. And maybe day 30, day 60, day 90, 1 year, 0 people are using the product. If that's happening, then it's not product market fit, or so people say. Really what you want is a retention curve that flattens to some point. Now, I would argue here that depending on what your startup is and what your product is, you might want to time bound that. For example, you might want to look at, say, a 1 year period. And I know it's early stage, it's like a year, what? But yeah, you might want to look at a year period and see it flatten, because the reality is not every product is designed to be used for the next 5-10 years. Sometimes you're going to get a really strong, LTV to CAC, really strong unit economics in that first year. And if so, then you'll want flat retention from, say, month 3 or whatever it may be. Now, what I would say is the data point and the retention chart is harder to use because of that point where you have to wait, right? Like, you can't look at retention before retention's happened. So, right, so if you're needing people to stick around on your product, then it means you need them to stick around for at least 30 days, but more like 3 to 6 months. Which, if you're very early stage and you're kind of validating your ideas, pushing things out and testing, you just can't wait that long. Which is why I think the survey can be more beneficial. And another thing you could look at is how active your user base is. This isn't necessarily as proven, but if you look at your DAU MAU ratio or your MAU wow and all of these things, there's like loads of different metrics you can pull depending on what your audience and your use case is to begin to figure out, do we have product market fit, or more importantly, are we actually improving things?
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and that very, very well explained. But what you also touched on there, Nathan, is like, it's a fast evolving market, right? In most cases, right? So how can what would you suggest to founders that kind of need to look at how they prioritize certain strategies in terms of finding that product market fit faster Is that what they should be aiming to do, or do you have any kind of real world examples of like successful pivots that you've helped implement in when a company kind of understands the market's changing and so that they need to follow suit?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll break that into two, right? I'll start with kind of the how people can get there faster. And I think it's probably nothing new here. It's probably something everyone's heard thousands of times, but being really close to the customer is super key. And I like to think of customer research as being the first thing that you can do to validate your idea, validate your product, and validate the problem. And what I mean by that is the first thing you're looking for is there a problem that a group of people have? Like enough of them, right? And speaking to them, you can understand that. But beyond that, you want to understand what actual transformation are they looking for? So, for example, let's use an analogy. Recently, we were working with a finance app to help people improve their credit, right?
Okay.
Now, the problem was I have a bad credit score. The solution and the transformation wasn't just now I have a good credit score. It's like, sure, they want a good credit score, but why do they want a credit score? And that was what we tried to dig into. And what we found is that in pretty much 80% of the cases, it was a first-time house. It was to buy a house, right? A mortgage. And then the other use cases were pretty much a car loan or some sort of loan. But people want to improve their credit rating because they want a loan, they want credit. So when you speak to your target customer, you want to understand, one, what's the problem at the moment? Two, what do you think the solution is? Or not the solution, sorry, the outcome. And then three, you want to think about, okay, what does that actually mean to them in their life? And I think beyond that, when you start to think, how can I get there faster? I would say it's about prioritization and focus and thinking, okay, if this is our target group, then what are we doing that's going to actually help them do that faster? I can't remember who it was who said it. I don't want to like misquote people. I don't know whether it was the Netflix founder or someone, but it was someone like notable. And they were basically saying that it might have been Airbnb, that they like to start with the dream solution, right? Like what is the best experience we can give our customers and work backwards from that. And I think in most cases, if you have that mindset, that's how you're going to be able to prioritize at a high level. And then it's just about how efficient you are executing. And the more you execute, the more experiments you can run, the faster you're going to get to product market fit.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I really resonate with what you're saying there in terms of talking to your audience, understanding them deeply and the problems they're trying to solve. Because, at Hyper, we talk a lot about, validating your idea as much as possible, and doing that before you prioritize tasks like jumping into the development or, expanding that internal team or increasing the marketing or whatever it might be. So, of course, like the validation and feedback data is crucial to understand here, but there can also be tendencies to kind of over rely on specific data or specific things that might lead to a bit of like tunnel vision. Like I know I've heard scenarios like, oh, I've got paying customers using my product, therefore I must have found product market fit, right? Or my product solving a problem for my business, so it must be doing the same for other businesses, right? So how can startups kind of strike the balance between looking at the quantitative data and that qualitative feedback that they get while they're validating and assessing their product market fit?
Yeah, good question. So I think when I think of qualitative and quantitative data, I like to put them in two separate buckets. I like to say that quantitative data shows us what's happening. So it shows us like where users are dropping off in the product, how many people are activating, how many people are retaining, what features people are enjoying the most, what screens people aren't liking, what features people are not using, right? It tells us what, but the qualitative data tells us the why, right? So it's like, if we use an example, we work a lot with subscription apps. If we take a mobile app and it's like 100% of people who install the app sign up, yes, but only 2% of them do a core action in the product. You can look at Mixpanel or Amplitude or Firebase or whatever product analytics tool you're using, and you can see that. But the question is why? And it's only when you start to speak to the customers and really get in front of them that you're going to understand why. So I think that's kind of how I like to separate them out. But in terms of the analysis paralysis, right, and are we being bogged down in so many metrics? What I would say is you want to have a North Star metric. right? A kind
Right.
of and I think of a North Star metric as a metric that that kind of defines value for your customer. So
Okay.
if we take Uber, for example, their North Star metrics might be number of successful rides. Spotify's North Star metric might be number of minutes a song's been listened to. Let's take another product. Let's say we looked at give me a product, Jamie. Give me something.
I mean, I liked your example with Uber. I think it's a pretty relevant one that everyone understands. So
Cool.
I would go
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, it's like once you figure out what the core value is that your product offers, then you want to look at how many people are doing that, right? And is that increasing month on month? But beyond that, you need to get a bit more granular without going too into the details. So what I
Right.
like to do is take a metric like day 30 retention, or even better, map out the entire product funnel and look at the different growth levers, and then pick maybe one metric for each growth lever, and they're going to be your core metrics. And what you want to do is you want to pick the 2 or 3 that are in the most dire need of help and focus there, whether that
Mm,
be cost per acquisition, whether that be day 30 retention rate, whether that be percentage of users actually trying your product, right? And
mm,
once you find those 3 metrics, that's all you want to focus on. Like everything else, chuck out the window. Don't look at cost per click. Don't look at click-through rate. Don't look at cost per sign up but not purchasing. Focus on these 3. All of those others matter, but at this stage, you want to figure out, is an experiment or a product change actually driving this metric in the right direction? If it is, then we're headed towards product market fit. If it's
mm.
not, then we need to think why, which means more qualitative research.
Right, right, exactly. But I'm also aware of scenarios where sometimes these core metrics that you may have selected are kind of conflicting with one another, right? And and then again, as you mentioned, you can get into this kind of tension within either yourself or the founding team, or get into that analysis paralysis, as you said, where then you start becoming confused around, how to prioritize these things effectively. Have you ever had a scenario like that where you've had to kind of guide someone away from some conflicting data or something like that?
Yeah, good question. So I think usually this happens when teams work in silos. So I've not seen it too much at the kind of early stage for startups. But for example, very common will be a marketing team or the marketer is given the objective of driving down cost of acquiring a new customer, and the product team is given the objective of increasing, day 30 retention. And they're the 2 metrics that the business is focusing on, right? Now, if the team is not aligned, or even if it's one person, they look at them separately, the actions they do will conflict, because you can put out, spammy messaging top of funnel, which will get you cheaper users, but they're not going to stay. And at the same time, you can, really gate your product and, make it really difficult to activate so that those that do increase retention, but then you've got a problem in the middle. So I think the way to overcome that is, one, to make sure that everyone on the team is working together, even if it's just 2 co-founders, and one focuses more on the acquisition and commercial side, and the other focuses more on the product tech side. Making sure that there's strong alignment and everyone's looking at the same metrics is key. And I think that's why it comes back to the North Star metric, because the whole idea of a North Star metric is that every single person in the company can look at any task they're doing on any given day and explain in a sentence how it drives up the North Star metric, right?
Mm.
So for example, oh, I'm debugging this portion of Uber, which is meaning that people think their ride is coming 5 minutes before it actually does. The reason I'm doing that is because people will be upset if their ride's late, and then they might not use us anymore. They might go to Bolt. So if we do this, more people will have rides, right? It's like
Mm.
anything from back end to front end to marketing, you want to point back to that North Star.
Right, right. So finding that North Star, but again, it kind of involves a bit of experimentation, right? Especially while you're pre-product and while you're validating. But that experimentation can also be kind of time consuming, costly, and obviously risky because of that. So how do founders, or how would you suggest founders kind of strike that balance between the need for that experimentation to understand the metrics that are important, with the need to validate and gain that traction, while they're still obviously pre-product?
Yeah, great question. So I think do you mean pre-product or pre-product market fit?
Or yeah, pre-product market fit. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think I'm a growth person, right? So I love experimentation. I love A/B tests,
Right.
all of that. But the reality is, I think there is a huge overemphasis on experimentation to the point now where, anyone on LinkedIn just posts about experiments and A/B tests and all this stuff. And it's like, if you're interviewing someone, you're looking out for, do they mention A/B tests? Like if they say A/B tests, then they must be analytical, right? And it's like,
Mm.
no, not really, because at an early stage, if you're going to run experiments, you need to have statistical significance. And what a lot of founders and early stage teams don't realize is that the sample size you need to run a statistically significant experiment is like oftentimes a lot bigger than they think. So what I mean is, let's take a really easy example that we can all relate to. Let's say that we're testing a landing page and we're testing the
Mm.
headline on a landing page, right? It's like, this has got nothing to do with product. This is just landing page. If you run that for like a day with like a $10 spend and you get some result and you're like, this one got 1, but this one got 4, this is the winner. That might not be the case at all. It might just be chance. The kind of
Mm.
analogy is if you and I, Jamie, if we had a race, right, and then we race one time, you might win. If we race 2 times, I might win. Who's faster, right? We have to race enough times to understand who's
Yeah,
genuinely faster or whether it's
of course.
chance. So I think I would say to people, look, stay away from experimentation, and focus on the qualitative first. And then
Hmm.
once you get bigger data sizes, then you can focus on experimentation. But even more, I would say experimenting only serves 2 purposes. Purpose 1 is to drive a metric in the right direction, up and to the right,
Hmm.
which may or may not happen. Purpose 2 is to learn something. So when you're early stage, and this ties into your point about, is it validating something? You want to make sure that any experiment you run has a clearly defined hypothesis. If you have a clearly defined hypothesis that can either be proven true or false, then regardless of what wins in your experiment, you will have learned something is true and something is false for your given product and audience. And I think that's the key. It's figuring out, how do we run experiments with, a good framework and a good hypothesis framework, as opposed to just, testing the colors of 2 buttons on a product.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, I think I like the way you're kind of explaining that, Nathan, in the sense that if you've tested something that didn't maybe work out the way you thought it would, it's not like a be all and end all, right? It's not all negative, because now you know that that doesn't work, right? So it's like the silver lining around maybe hitting a dead end in some sense, that now you know that you can focus on the other options that you had prior to focusing in on that certain metric. So no, that's interesting. And then, so as you kind of progress, obviously you'll have a lot of internal battles as a solo founder, even if it's 2 or 3 founders. But as your team will grow kind of throughout this process, obviously there's going to be some inevitable tension potentially between like the product and then the marketing or the sales side of things as well, right? So how do you make sure that the team stays aligned in that goal of finding product market fit, or once you found it, to ensure that you stay with it? Are there some strategies that you can kind of foster like some good collaboration down the line with it as your team grows?
Good question. So I think I'll start even earlier, right? I'll start with kind of in the very early stages, and what things you want
Yeah.
to do now to make sure that you set yourself up for the right culture and success down the line. And what I would say is, product and marketing are 2 sides of the same coin. And I have this analogy which I love. It's the road, which essentially goes like this, right? There's only really 2 groups of people that matter. There's your company and your team, and then there's the target customer. And if you imagine that there is a road between these 2 groups of people, all that happens is you go up the road and down the road, up the road and down the road. When you go up the road, you are shipping something to your customer. You're giving them something that you've taken from your company, which is the product. When you're at the other end, you're coming back with research, right? Market research and learnings. Now, whether or not it's product or marketing, the same thing happens. I'm either here in my business marketing towards the target customer, in which case I'm going up the road, or I'm here and I've done some marketing, and I want to go back and figure out what worked. So it's just one road. And I think the way to look at it is, are we pushing towards the same goal, looking at the same target user? If you are, and you're clear on what your target user is and what your market is, then it's easier, much easier to have synergy. The challenge is, in an early stage startup, oftentimes no one knows what the market is. And the question isn't actually, can we find product market fit? The question is, can we find a group of people that like our product? And that's where I'll be bold and say that's on the founder, right?
Yeah.
I've had some kind of discussions, and different people believe different things, but I personally believe that as a founder, you start your business, or in an ideal world, you start your business because you've identified a problem that a market has. You've already done the identification. You've seen that, let's use the Uber example again. Taxis are really expensive and it's not convenient to get a ride. That's the problem, right? And you've realized that this is really hurting, professionals in, the city, for example. It doesn't, but just hypothetically speaking, or out of the city. And you're like, I want to solve this problem. Again, I think this is definitely a YC thing. You want to be attached to that problem, right? That's what matters for your business. And your business is almost not your product. Your business is your problem, right? I'll give you an example. I was working a few years back at a fintech, and this was a open banking solution for SMEs. And the idea was to help SMEs with their payments, to take payments more easily and at a cheaper cost through open banking. Now, there was a massive pivot because initially the focus was on small local shops, tradespeople, plumbers, window cleaners, people doing high volume, low quantum transactions, right? So like £20, £30. We realized that wasn't working because they already had a solution that worked. It's called Apple Pay, right? And it's way easier for them to just get a card machine and tap. We went into one shop one time. It was a corner shop, and I went in, right? I was leading growth, and we had a discussion, like a couple people in their suits, and this guy just looks at us, and he's like, "Man, how long did that take you?" It took you 30 seconds. He's like, "I can tap in 1 second." He said, "This isn't for me, man." Right? And that feedback itself was enough to be like, yeah, this isn't it. So what you do then is you pivot. But when you pivot, you need to still keep the problem in your hand, right?
Yeah.
So the ideal situation would have been to then go back to the drawing board and find another technical route to improve payments for this target customer. But what we realized is actually that this specific niche doesn't even have a problem. But there's another niche that does, and that was tradespeople that invoiced. People who have invoice paid late, people who have to pay fees, depending on how their customers pay their invoices. That was the target segment that we pivoted to, right? So I think that early on as the founder, you want to identify your problem and your target customer and hold that. So now kind of back to your question of how do we deal with the tension as we scale? If you imagine now that company who's got a really clear persona and target customer starts to scale their team, everyone who joins the team is going to recognize this is what we do. We help this people with this problem. And it just becomes so much clearer. We have the same metrics that we're targeting, and that's what we do. And I think to scale before that is where the problem comes.
Right. Yeah. No, I really like that example with that payment startup that you mentioned, in terms of also really highlighting that validation is great and you may be doing a lot of it, but it's also you need to be asking the right questions, right? Not necessarily like, what do you think of my product, but like, why wouldn't you use this product? Why? Oh, because it takes me 1 second to do this anyway. So it's not actually a problem, right? So those, you're only going to figure out those things by asking the right questions. You don't want people to just say, oh yes, this is brilliant, that sounds great, because maybe originally that product really did sound great. It's like, oh, that sounds like an easy process. But then you compare it to what's actually already happening there in terms of Apple Pay. it's not really a product that'll be useful anymore. So that's really interesting. So now, okay, you've got a clear defined kind of idea of what the problem that the target audience, the understanding what the target audience is and what that problem is, right? So now you can easily kind of align your team or your other co-founders or the direction of your startup, right? So they often kind of hear that saying that like growth is kind of a team sport, and I'm sure this falls right into the work that you've been doing. So like, how can individuals then within that founding team contribute within the startup to kind of be incentivized to help the company as a whole drive towards that product market fit?
Yeah, great question. I like to say there's no I in team, but there's an I in victory, there's an I in champion, there's an I in winning, and there's an I in vision.
I think you could go on.
Right? Like there's an I in a lot of the great words, and I think the idea is it's a team sport, but everyone needs to play their position, right?
Yeah.
And I think the challenge in a startup is there isn't really positions. Everyone's just kind of helping out everywhere, which is what's needed. And I think that means that everyone needs to kind of leave their ego at the door, align themselves and marry themselves to the problem, fix their sight on the North Star metric, and just work together, right? That's kind of that early stage. It's pretty easy for them to do that. Now, when the startup starts to grow and it really starts to push up, I think you need to then make sure that you're hiring the right people, right? And that you're bringing on board people that actually have the expertise your startup needs. Either they've done it before, which is often the case, but oftentimes what you'll find is people that have done it before don't want to do it again. It's like they want the new thing. Especially like everyone likes to talk about A players, right? A players don't want to play the same position for the rest of their life. They want to be an A player in a different position in some cases. And I think understanding that might be the case, you're looking for people who just have a mindset of, I'm going to get stuck in. I don't know everything, but I'll learn. And I think that is the number one thing that every individual contributor in the startup needs to adopt, is that mindset of, I don't necessarily have the answer to your question, but if you give me 24 hours, I can try and find it. And if everyone's doing that, then you're going to have much better synergy.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's a lot more complex in terms of when you're hiring for growth and looking at different personalities and kind of profiles of people. Say you're looking for, an early stage CTO, right? And you get a candidate that's maybe, being a C-suite level kind of at a massive company. And it may have a very impressive profile, but doesn't have that experience with working from a team from the grassroots, right? So can you give us maybe some examples of some support that you provided startups that you've been involved in the past that maybe got it wrong initially, and why they got that wrong, or if they avoided it, how did you make sure they did avoid it prior to committing to any particular candidate?
Yeah, great question. So I guess one example, which is kind of touching on that, but slightly down a different stream, is there was a startup we were working with, and at the time they had a CMO who they hired kind of to work alongside the founders. Very small team, right? So kind of founders and CMO. And the CMO had a really big C-suite background, enterprise background, 8-figure budget, big team, pointing fingers, telling people what to do, stakeholder management, being in board meetings. And he was very much brand focused, right? That was what he came from. Now, the challenge in a startup, and everyone says this, right, is you need people to just get stuck in and get stuff done. And sometimes people from a different, a more corporate or enterprise background, not that they don't get stuff done, but the role is very different. It's much more about aligning people and, persuading people than it is getting stuck in and, figuring out how to fix a problem. So essentially, that's when I came in to support on that, right? And kind of be the person who helps on that front. Now, in terms of advising for hiring, I think that, don't worry too much about who you're hiring and what you're hiring for until you really need to.
Yeah.
Like everyone loves hiring, but I think hiring is, it's hiring and culture are good things, but really you want a scrappy team to get product market fit. And To do that, you're just looking for people who are like, I'm going to give this a go. Why don't we do this, outside of the box thinking?
But also being critical in a sense of trying to keep it as streamlined as possible early on, right? Unless you've obviously identified, I guess, certain areas that you might not have the area of expertise. But yeah, no, I think that makes sense. So yeah, then Nathan, obviously, you're quite an expert in this field, it seems, right? So obviously you've been starting to put this experience and, your expertise into practice with Perceptics as of a year and a half ago, I guess now. So what exactly do you offer there, and how can Perceptics help the founders that we're working with at Hyper?
This is a great question, and actually, as you were asking that question, I had a different lens to kind of answer, which I think is going to be more relevant for everyone listening. I'll explain to you how Perceptics went about finding product market fit. Right.
Yeah, brilliant.
So we're a growth agency, right? And reality is there's a lot of agencies everywhere, right? I still get emails, I'm sure you do, and everyone on this call, like multiple times a day, of someone trying to either sell me a lead gen, sell me Facebook ads, sell me SEO, sell me Google ads. It's like everyone's doing that, right? And what all of those people have identified is that there's a problem, you need to grow your business, and they've got the solution. And the irony is that the problem is shared between pretty much every company, and all of those solutions can probably work, right? Different times, different rates, and it varies. But yes, you can grow your business with SEO. Yes, you can grow your business with paid ads. Yes, you can grow your business with, product-led growth and outbound. All of it works. So when starting Perceptics, I'd come from a mobile app background, right? Spoke was a mobile app, Amble was a mobile app. And I knew that mobile apps struggled to grow profitably. So what I did was niche down and be like, okay, Perceptics is going to stand and support mobile apps. Now, the irony is my experience isn't just in mobile apps, right? I have experience in web apps, in SaaS, and in other kind of platforms and other industries, now in B2B. But when you're finding product market fit, you need to niche down, right? That's step one. So we did, and we niche down into mobile apps. And what we do is we help mobile apps to grow profitably. So a lot of the work we do is with early stage mobile apps. That would usually be a founder that has launched their product. They've launched MVP. They're now looking to, get some initial traction, and then they're looking to scale that up and grow it profitably. And that's what we help. And the way we do that is by looking at the full funnel, whether that be user acquisition, app store optimization, onboarding experiments, monetization experiments, because the goal is, can you get a customer who hasn't heard about your business to hear about your business, try your product, engage with your product, pay for your product? So that's essentially what we do. And I think there's two takeaways there. One is, for your own startups, don't be afraid to stand for a niche and stand for a target customer, even though you might actually be able to support others too, right? Like I could easily say, look, we help SaaS, we help agencies, we help D2C, e-com brands, we help subscription apps, because actually, believe it or not, we have had a client in pretty much every single one of those categories, and we do help clients in all those categories. But what we stand for and position ourselves as is a growth agency for mobile apps. So, I mean, yeah, if you're a mobile app founder here and you're looking for growth support, definitely get in touch. If you're not a mobile app founder, like I said, we can still help you. We don't work just with mobile apps, but our core positioning is mobile apps.
Yeah. Okay. No, brilliant. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'll be sharing Nathan's details. I've already supplied the LinkedIn profile, but I'll get your email and your contact number and share it to the event after this is concluded, mate. So people will reach out to you through those channels. But that sounds really interesting. So we've got a couple questions here in the chat here for you, Nathan. So Malcolm Ford was asking kind of, what do you actually mean by metrics? I don't know if you want to provide some clarity around that.
Good question. Yeah. So by metrics or KPIs, I basically mean numbers that matter to your business, right? So for example, let's say that you are a SaaS, software as a service product, and you help businesses with something. You're going to have certain numbers that correlate growth across your product. whether that be the number of new signups, the number of paying customers, the number of people who have created an account, the percentage of people that are still using the product after 30 days. Any number that correlates to user actions is a metric.
Okay. Yep. No, I think that makes sense. Again, yeah, it's probably a great question because it can be used in so many different kind of scenarios. Gary just put in quite a good question here. He's been kind of exploring bringing in this IT company as potential like CTO or to act as a CTO for him. He's given them a good deal, but the company's saying they don't want to take on that kind of CTO position, and they probably would want to, I'm assuming, act as more just a pay for service a deal there. So what should he do in that scenario, Nathan, in terms of, does he need to go to an investor now and raise funds so he can hire that company, or how can he kind of navigate that in terms of how to structure that original deal while bringing in something like a CTO?
Yeah, so I'm guessing, Gary, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my assumption is that you found someone you think is going to be a great fit, and because you're early stage, maybe you don't want to necessarily pay such a high salary, but are considering like an equity and salary agreement or equity and fixed fee arrangement. Mm-hmm. And because they're not for that, you're looking to raise funds so that you can hire them. I would say two things. I would say one, the CTO role is the most important role in any tech startup, right? Because it's a tech startup and they're the tech person. And it's like, if they leave or if they're not there to support you, who've you got? So ideally, I think the ideal situation is for you to, be able to persuade some CTO, might not necessarily be this person, to join as a co-founder, right? Or to come in as a CTO for equity and support you. Now, what you could do is you could look for, developers that maybe are like, tech leads or have good tech experience, but have never been a CTO, who might be able to support on the side of their full-time role. Like you might have a full-time role, look for someone else in a similar situation, and then you can work together. Or I would say at this stage, try and I know it may not be feasible, but try and find some tech support that you can pay for yourself without funding. If you're going to do this yourself, or speak to Hyper, right? I think that they're the three options. But I think if you're going to go down the shall I raise funds route, I'd say speak to Hyper.
Great answer, Nathan. I couldn't agree more, man. So we have another one from Dave here. So he was asking around, do these type of people, back to when we're kind of assessing who to hire and what to look at when you're considering different hires, right? So you're saying, do these types of people, the A players, the people who knock in and crack on, not present a bit of a flight risk? Oops, sorry, just a flight risk in the startup during the growth kind of phase, and variety of work becomes too specialized or too like professional. So how can you kind of make sure you're I guess walking the line there in terms of not going too risky with these kind of dynamic, energetic startup enthusiast kind of employees?
Yeah, great question. So I think I would say, one, it depends on the role. If we assume it's a marketing or growth role, then I would say this. I would say if you're early stage, you don't need a full-time senior growth hire, right? I would suggest either one of two things. Either one, find a company like Perceptics who support early stage startups for growth, because one, will be here for a long time. Two, you've got the flexibility. If when things are looking good and you want to bring that in-house, you can. Or two, find a fractional head of growth. So that would be someone who has, and there's a lot out there. Like if you need support in a specific industry, reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email, and I can connect you with as many people as I know. But a fractional head of growth would be someone who, maybe supports you 1 day or 2 days a week at a really high strategic level, but also gets involved in some of the mucky stuff, or, tells you how you can do some of the mucky stuff. That's the alternative. Right. Now, if you're fixed on hiring an A player, are they a flight risk? Yes. I'd say every A player is a flight risk. And I think reality is you need to be able to identify that. So what I mean is, just because someone's a flight risk, it doesn't mean that they're not the right hire for this time, right?
Mm.
You just, I guess from your perspective, you'll want to make sure that the shares vest in a sensible time frame so that they don't fly with all of the shares. But I wouldn't not hire someone because you think they're going to leave in a year if you really think they can add value for the next year, because there's always going to be people down the line who you can hire. And in terms of will they be able to cope when things get too professionalized? That's why the fractional head of growth thing, right? So like a fractional head of growth or a growth consultant is going to be able to come in and help you figure out what needs to happen and be capable enough to operate in all of those areas. At some point, you're going to find a channel that really works, which may or may not be in that person's expertise, right? For example, I'm not the best at SEO, right? If I was a fractional head of growth working with you and I identified SEO as a channel to test here, I do have the capability to get us off the ground and testing SEO. But if this becomes the core channel and we're like, this is where the focus needs to be, then the solution for you would be to then bring in an SEO specialist to own that channel, and then hopefully have myself in this situation, right, still support the team in other capacities, or you have that role is redundant.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So again, it's very much case by case too. I think also with this next question from Ben, in terms of the key KPIs and traits you look for in a CTO at an early stage startup. I know you were kind of touching on this before, but yeah, I don't know if you have any kind of insights there.
Awesome. Yeah, so I do. I think that, again, a CTO role is really, really important. And what I would say is good CTOs are not easy to find because everyone needs a CTO. Every startup and scale up is in need of a CTO, and therefore you're competing with all of those. So ideally, you want someone who understands, both front end dev and kind of back end infrastructure, has got some experience, leading a team, has enough hands-on experience to get things done. They're probably versed in multiple, soft programming languages, at least to a decent level. But again, it really depends on what your startup is. I would say this: if you're an early stage startup and you're looking for your MVP, you don't need a CTO. If you can find someone who's willing to join you on the journey long term, then you should definitely do that. If you can't, then what you should probably do is, either find a fractional CTO or a dev agency that can have some senior support to make sure that the infrastructure is scalable, whilst providing the development resource to actually build what you need built, right? That's what you should do. Or speak to Hyper.
I was waiting for that. Brilliant. Well, it looks like that's about all the questions from the chat. And so I just wanted to end off on a kind of a nice concluding question here in terms of emerging trends going forward into the kind of the tech startup sector and world. Where do you see the trends going in the next few years, Nathan, and anything that you wanted to highlight for our founders?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this it ties into our whole product market fit conversation and the investment landscape, that we've long of the days where investors are just throwing out money to anyone who has an idea or a Figma prototype. Right? Like 5 years ago, you could walk in with a pitch deck and then raise $500,000, right? Yeah. It's very, very difficult to do that today unless you're well connected, have a great track record, or manage to find investors that don't really know what they're talking about, and just rich people who want to give money away. If you can find them, great. But I think what's going to happen is investors are going to become increasingly focused on, is this viable? Is this profitable? Right? And as much as they're going to want the big bets of companies that grow really massive, they're also going to start to, in my opinion, not necessarily the big VCs, but angels specifically look for companies that are profitable or can be profitable very soon. So I think a trend is going to be, startups having a more lean team, being more focused on unit economics and less focused on this kind of growth at all costs. And I would say the other one is obviously going to be the impact of AI, which I have no idea what's going to happen. Um, maybe none of us have jobs. Maybe we will retire because AI saves the day. But what I would say is I think AI is going to make things easier and harder in that doing certain tasks is become easier, but being unique and having a USP and standing out is become harder
Mm.
because I don't know if I'm sure a lot of people have seen the movie Incredibles, but like I love that movie. But it's one of my favorite all-time films. But there's a line in that movie that says, when everyone's super, no one is. And I think that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing a whole load of companies leveraging AI, and it's no longer good enough to have AI. So I think really
Mhm.
finding that differentiating factor is going to be harder.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And it's not only just saying, as I'm sure you're aware, in the last few years, just having an AI integration, right? That's kind of like just a throwaway comment that people make, but it's about how that's going to be used and that you understand the capability of it and how you're leveraging it. I think is also really important to show that you have a clear intent for it as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, Nathan, thank you so much, man. I think that was really, really interesting, really beneficial, hopefully for the founders. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you.
And thank you again, Nathan. I really enjoyed our conversation, man.
No, thank you, Jamie. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you all got some value.
Yeah, sure they did. All right, guys, have a good evening. Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.